Senator Scullion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to acknowledge the very special work that has been done by Corporate Australia in assisting government get certainly one of our major priorities for Indigenous affairs underway. Our priorities, as you would know, Mr. President, are getting kids to school, getting adults into work, and providing for safer communities. So I'd like to acknowledge how the corporate sector is quietly but surely taking a very important leadership role on the second of these priority policy areas. Recently I spoke in this chamber about the need to recognise that Indigenous families share everyone else's aspirations in exactly the same way as every family operates, that we all hope that our sons and daughters achieve a fantastic future for themselves and, of course, for future generations. We do need results. Unfortunately, indicators have shown that outcomes simply have not improved and in some areas are getting worse. We need a new way to work with Indigenous people so they can engage with the economy to break out of the spiral of poverty, neglect and marginalisation. Sadly, Mr. President, the employment rate for Aboriginal and Islander Australians have gone backwards over the last 6 years. So it's of some urgency that we do something to reverse this trend and the corrosive effects of welfare that go with that. And of course, the people who can assist us most are of course the employers and Corporate Australia. They're the ones who create demand for Aboriginal and Islander workers. I'd like to acknowledge, for example, the work of Andrew Forrest of Fortescue Metals Group. He established the Australian Employment Covenant, an industry-led initiative that attracted over 60,000 job pledges from 338 employers. Over 15,000 of these jobs have been filled. This is a real breakthrough. Now, a lesson learned through the Covenant is that we need a demand-driven approach when the employer provides the job and the job seeker is trained. The sad thing is, too often, the job seeker is trained with no job guarantee at the end and, in fact, no real connection to the job. So the days of training for training's sake need to end. In his own workforce, Aboriginal and Islander people in FMG comprise some 12.5% of the permanent, long-term, fully employed workforce. His groups also work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Construction Resource Group. This is an Indigenous-focused mine services company that has developed an extensive Indigenous labour network across Australia. It has grown at a stellar rate with more than $50 million in contracts under 2013. This is a fantastic initiative of getting into the service industry and mining, which everyone in the business would acknowledge is the place to be if you're growing small to medium enterprises. Now, the government in its election platform committed $45 million to create job opportunities for up to 5,000 Indigenous Australians under the Generation 1 demand-driven employment model. The model, based on Mr Forrest's vocational training and employment centres, will ensure Aboriginal and Islander trainees receive practical training with a job, with a guarantee when trainees are skilled up. The Business Council of Australia is another organisation that's doing a fantastic job, as is all of its members, of working with the larger corporations, providing Aboriginal and Islander Australians with meaningful work opportunities. In the last 12 months alone, their members placed 3,500 Aboriginal and Islander people in jobs and traineeships. The Business Council members have a total Indigenous workforce of just over 20,000 people. Members have provided $2 billion for Indigenous business contracts. That's $2 billion worth of contracts for Indigenous businesses. They also have a number of joint ventures and on top of that have contributed over 100,000 hours on a pro bono basis. That's all in the last 12 months. It shows that there's so much goodwill out there and it's been harnessed in a very positive way. I'd like to congratulate the Business Council of Australia, CEO Jennifer Westacott, the Indigenous Engagement Task Force, for all your work in supporting your members at achieving this marvellous outcome. Some of Australia's best-known companies have been engaged. Woolworths, for example, possibly not that well known, is possibly the biggest employer of Indigenous Australians, with around 2,800 Indigenous employees. Coles is another major player putting in a substantive effort. They've invested in 6 Indigenous employment coordinators to drive their commitment, and I know the numbers of Aboriginal and Islander employees is growing rapidly. All 4 of our major banks are doing an outstanding job. They're taking on hundreds of school-based trainees every year, and they're converting them into ongoing employees. The Commonwealth Bank has established an Indigenous customer assistance line to service remote clients. It's a great innovation. It was an innovation of the bank, and I know the other banks are starting to talk in the same area and will shortly follow suit. Transfield, another great Australian company, they've brought their Indigenous employment numbers up to 4.5% of their total workforce. This is an outstanding result, and they need to be commended. And there are many others. Recently, I visited Copperchem Mine in Cloncurry in Queensland. The project is committed to local Aboriginal employment and to community development. And so it's an incredible change. Instead of fly-in, fly-out workers, which is the convention about almost every mine we see around Australia, they've decided that they're going to invest in local Aboriginal and Islander workers. The mine has a purpose-built training facility which provides training to new recruits who have a guaranteed job on the mine when they graduate. And it was fantastic to meet Scotty Seymour. He runs the store out at the mine, a real character, well known around the area, and he had nothing but praise for Copperchem. And he said that basically they give everyone a fair go, and if you want to have a crack, you'll get a job. There are many other examples at the local level where Aboriginal and Islander Australians are creating their own business opportunities. I was lucky enough, whilst visiting Camberwell again in Western Queensland, to visit the Myuma training program. It's reached an impressive milestone this year. It's increased its intake 5-fold since it first began in 2006. So this is a program that has been equipping young men and women, mostly from disadvantaged backgrounds, to get them ready for work in 10 weeks. Colin Saltmere is an outstanding Australian and is a very proud Queenslander who I think has shown the way, and I know there are those from other parts of this chamber who would know about his work and the work of his organisation. He runs a commercial business. He focuses on the employer. Without their vacancies and his constant pressure for them, he wouldn't actually have a business model. Graduates from his model are able to start for Copperchem, whether it's Rangers Bay in Mount Isa or Longreach, any of the other employers. They're looking for work-ready people, and when you visit his facility, the Rangers are on one side in the morning checking out all the cars, doing their rangering things. There's a bunch of mining trainees taking off to the quarry to go and have those on-the-job experiential training, which is just so very valuable. So he needs to be commended. I congratulate the visionaries, including the many who I have not named, who go about their work without acknowledgement. I'd urge all Australians to play their part by taking action in their sphere of influence to further engage Aboriginal men and women in employment.